My background is in journalism and compliance. So I have a Bachelor of Journalism with honors from the University of Queen's College in Halifax. I
Wow.
was the editor of the campus paper at Dalhousie University for 2 years and won the Student Journalist of the Year award from the Canadian University Press. And then I was a documentary associate producer with the Fifth Estate in CBC Toronto, making documentaries and doing freelancing for different Canadian newspapers. I wrote for Vice for a while and did some freelancing. And then I realized that journalism would not be a lucrative career path and I would do something different. So I started learning to code, self-taught, and I had a job with the Nova Scotia Association of Realtors for 2 years, working on compliance automation solutions for them. And then I found an opportunity at WebPreserver when WebPreserver was still a separate startup from Pagefreezer and only had 30 customers and 2 full-time employees. And, within 6 months, it eventually merged with Pagefreezer.
Did the product look a lot different than it looks today?
The basic functionality was the same, but there were far fewer features. It was the social media automations that we still have today, but they were far more limited. It was only for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And the types of content that you could automate the capture of were more limited on those platforms. The other value proposition was that it would digitally authenticate everything you capture like it does today. The value proposition was basically when you need to capture social media from these platforms, here's a way that you can do that at scale. But it was through the early conversations that we had with customers at that time who were finding real value in getting to automate processes that they were previously using entire teams of paralegals or contractors for. With the time that we were freeing up for them, they were happy to talk to us about what they would like to see the product continue to do. And that's where we started learning more about the file types that they would want exports in, the ways that they would be able to perform discovery on the evidence that they collect using the tool and scale that out. For our private investigator customers, we learned more about how they wanted to actually present the evidence they were collecting to their end users. And we learned all of the really niche things that you only learn from talking to customers that made the product really fit people's desired workflows, things that were as niche as all of the different formatting types that PDFs should fit so that they are compatible both with digital e-filing systems used by courts, but also compatible with being printed off and put on someone's physical desk, and what information needs to be contained in the metadata on every page and how that needs to be formatted to still work if it's going to be printed off. So it was very similar in terms of the user experience and layout to what you have today, but far less feature rich and only working to save time on a couple steps of the entire discovery to collection to export and review workflow, where today it's far more comprehensive.
It's funny to think of you as one of the WebPreserver doulas that brought it into the world.
Yeah, I mean, Diego was the first person to work on WebPreserver because when I started, WebPreserver was already about 2 years old. Diego had initially been tasked with drafting specs for a tool that would basically fulfill the niche that was left in the market by our web archiving and social media archiving products. The question that we would keep hearing from customers, prospects that wanted a comprehensive solution was, not only do I need to keep a record of everything that I'm publishing and how my intellectual property is appearing in the market online, I also want to know how my intellectual property is being represented by other people online.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that you were here right at the beginning. What does your typical week look like at Page?
Yeah, so I manage a team of 8 people. Really, these days, my role is to ensure that my team of 8 people are unblocked and have the resources and the training and the access to information and the space to experiment and make mistakes that they need to be able to fulfill my team's mandate of ensuring that we are providing a stellar pre-sales experience in a sales engineering role with the sales team, that when the sales team is landing new deals, we are successfully performing onboarding, implementations, and training to a spec that earns a customer's positive sign off within 30 days and preferably under 14 business days. What that practically looks like in a week is a lot of meetings.
What kind of customers reach out for support the most?
Yeah, it's going to be customers who are the most highly regulated or who are dealing with the highest priority deadlines. For WebPreserver, we can have customers reach out to us on a Friday evening, and we set the expectation in our contracts that we have customer support 40 hours a week from morning to evening Eastern time. But that's not the hours that lawyers necessarily work.
Yeah.
So anyone who's dealing with a tight deadline on the WebPreserver collections investigation side, it is legal teams and investigators, not so much actual regulatory bodies that have high priority collections, because the scenario that we encounter multiple times a year is I finally found the smoking gun of the social media profile for someone that they thought that I would never find. And it's amazing. Looks like there's a lot of gold here, but they could be hot on my trail and close this down any minute. So how can I collect everything as soon as possible? The nature of these types of investigations is as soon as you find anything you want to collect, it always becomes an immediate priority. So we hear from those users if they're running into any challenges. But the nature of support also is that we aim to have trained customers enough that they will be able to successfully overcome challenging collections or audit requests just simply through training on the product.
What's something you find yourself explaining pretty often to customers?
Yeah, people want to know what WebPreserver is actually doing. It's very funny. We're showing WebPreserver off in a demo. We often get questions like, can WebPreserver get content from profiles if I'm not a friend with that profile and the content is private? People don't have a concept of how it works. The way that social media or websites deliver information to an end user is really opaque to an end user. You don't know how it gets there, it just shows up. And so when you're considering a tool that collects the end result, it's very similar. You don't know how the information got there in the first place. You don't know how this tool is going to access it and then save it. And the first questions people usually have for a tool like this are, is this legit and above board? Because there are people online who will promise services to go collect evidence. They want to know that we're not hackers. There aren't many tools that do what WebPreserver does. And then the next question that people have is, how can I trust what I am capturing is comprehensive and legitimate? Most people that we talk to don't have much of an idea around the difference between social media APIs, where these platforms allow data from their platform to be translated into other platforms in a way that you can ingest it and manipulate it and present it in different ways, versus social media serves content to an end user, to a mobile or to a desktop page or application that presents an image of the data that comes from their own APIs internally. And that's something that we have to educate people on. What we are really doing is providing a managed service to overcome the challenge posed by these social media companies keeping their APIs opaque and sealed off from researchers, investigators, and law enforcement. And we are providing a managed service of reverse engineering how they serve content to an end user to perform very elegant automations that capture the end result of what they serve you in as comprehensive a manner as possible, given the environment that we're working in. So your question was, what do people ask the most? But my answer is really that we try to preempt as many questions we have about how it may work, because the questions are, is this legitimate and above board? Is this just basically a screenshot tool? Is this using their APIs and do you have API access? And then, is this happening locally or is it in the cloud? We try and preempt all of that as much as possible and capture this general question of what is this and how it works, to say that WebPreserver is a tool that automates activity in your browser to automate the discovery, expansion, and collection of social media and website records in a manner that is comprehensive, transparent, and happens completely locally so that you maintain a complete chain of custody.
What is something that tends to make the biggest difference in how smoothly a capture or an investigation goes?
The thing that makes an investigation or collection process as easy as possible is identifying the scope of what you are looking for as quickly as possible. The greatest enemy you're going to run into is the entropy of collecting and reviewing more than you need. What matters the most there is that, ideally, if you're an investigator and your investigation enters the online world, as it almost inevitably will, the perfect tool for you to have would be a database that has a record of everything that's ever been published online, easily searchable for you. And you can be as greedy with keywords as you want and ask as many questions as you want to think of keywords and of course, that's not the environment that you're working in. The environment you're working in is an environment where everything is changing constantly, where records are being removed very quickly, being added very quickly. And the scope of records that you can access is the cliche, it's the very tip of an iceberg. And your time is your most valuable asset. So, how can you understand what you need and narrow that down as fast as possible? For a tool like WebPreserver, the time that it can save you is you identify the Facebook page of someone who you would like to understand, have they ever mentioned this keyword, or has this person ever interacted with their posts, ever commented on their posts or their photos? The immediate value proposition of WebPreserver is that, this is a tool that will enable you to collect the URL of every record that this person has published, and no native feature within the platform to be able to search every word, every string they've ever published on their own profile, and every comment that they've ever received. But we can reverse engineer what they will serve to you to do that. What it necessarily takes is scraping the URL by scrolling through everything, copying all of that, then opening up every record one page at a time, automating the expansion of everything. You will have a record you can export, and then you can search those keywords. So, you can do that for one person, but you're not going to do that for everyone that they are friends with. So, understanding how long things will practically take and correspondingly shrinking the size of your investigation down to the scope, knowing the principles to follow to narrow your scope as soon as possible and figure out where your best leads are. The first thing you have to do that's the most important is to figure out where you can afford to invest your time before you get greedy with trying to capture as many records as possible.
Would you say that's the part of the process that people underestimate or overlook the most?
There's lots of aspects of social media and web collections that people underestimate the most, ranging from, on the social media side, the sheer volume and scale of content, as well as how complex some of it may be. To be specific, we deal with lots of cases where we have to help investigators explain the scope of what's been asked of them to the legal team that they're working with. Because commonly they will say, great, I found this Facebook page, but I started using WebPreserver to capture it. And I realized this person posts on Facebook more than a dozen times a day, and they have since 2007. And that's not an exaggeration. There's a lot of people who use the platform that way. And if you were going to collect everything that they've ever published, it would be more than 50,000 records. And so we have to help them explain, as the subject matter experts, here's what you're really asking for. Is it possible? Yes.
Sure.
I know you're excited that we found this, and it would be great if we could collect everything, but the stuff that this person posted in high school probably isn't as valuable as what they've published since, what they published in the 1 year that pertains to this case. Let's cast our net that wide first. And if this is interesting or relevant at all, let's consider expanding from there. So that can be what people underestimate the most, is that for any website you encounter, any social media profile you encounter, you know, paradoxically, the narrowing your scope is the most important thing. You can easily underestimate the depth of what you're embarking on for any of these types of projects. Similarly, on the website capture side, we've dealt with lots of cases where someone thinks that they have a simple collections project because there is a company that sells household furnishings, and the task is simply to capture a record of how they present all of their products because there could be potential copyright infringement. Well, then you realize that when you open the page for a lamp, there are options to expand the description for every different type of fabric for the lampshade, is a real example. And descriptions might have text that was directly parsed from your client's website. And so then you realize, oh shit, I need these for every lamp page. I need all of, and then you get into an exercise of combinatorics. It becomes mathematical. You're starting to run the equations to say, like, damn, I don't just need 1,000 pages. I might need 16,000 pages because they can all require the page to be interacted with in such a certain way to show certain text. And those are very real examples. Additionally, things like retail products and the reviews that are left. We've worked with regulators who are looking into things like, our youth commenting on the reviews for tobacco products or other regulated products. And people are leaving comments that either seem like they are coming from minors. Sometimes we've seen people posting pictures of themselves using it and they're clearly a minor. You realize, well, in my mind was capture 1,000 retail product pages and their reviews. I thought maybe it's just click open the reviews tab or see if WebPreserver can help me automate opening the reviews tab. But for some of these products, there are 30 pages of reviews or more, and you have to click a next button to get through all those reviews. And then you realize you're really in over your head because now you need to measure how many pages of reviews does each of them have? How can you account for that? How can you automate that? So it's really important when you set out on these projects, not just to consider how narrow you can make your scope as possible, but also to understand the very specific terrain you're working in. We have some great guides for WebPreserver investigations for TikTok and Discord and Facebook. And so we're prepared to help walk people through those like very structured terrains, which are actually the best case scenario. Social media, at least you can understand the full scope of what you may need to collect for the accounts or groups you are interested in. For websites, it's a completely different picture where there's no standard implementation and you need to know what really matters to your client or to your case so that you can quickly survey the scene, understand, is this going to be something where I can run a straightforward bulk capture, or is this something where I might need to get help from an expert to understand how to perform a comprehensive capture in case the smoking gun is somewhere in the last comments page.
Were you doing social media investigations when you were doing your journalism career?
Yes.
How different does it look now?
I mean, I was last doing that stuff outside of WebPreserver around 2017, 2018. And so that's before even the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal that spoiled API access. So WebPreserver really took off after that happened because there were competitor products at the time in the market that actually just completely died in the water. And the people running those projects decided they wouldn't maintain them after these social media APIs cut off access. It used to be as easy as paying for an API license to something like Facebook and then building a wrapper around that to build a tool that can submit queries against their social media graph API that would help you find people with this name who live in this town and went to this college. So we built a tool that would just circumvent that. by using automations that we would maintain to just interact with content that could serve to the user. And that turned out to be our saving grace because we had this rush of new customers who were saying, all right, well, I was using this, but it doesn't work. Are you guys affected by this? And we could say happily, no, we're not, because we know that APIs are always unreliable. And we pay engineers to stay on top of this stuff. And we have test suites to make sure that we are able to keep automating this. So yeah, we're happy to set you up with the license right now to continue your investigations. So that's one way that things were very different. It was really the Wild West in terms of permissions, but WebPreserver was already prepared to adapt to that. The other thing that was different in the mid 2010s and earlier for social media investigations was simply that people used to publish so much more publicly on social media. Most people are not so laissez-faire with posting pictures of last night's party or their recent criminal activity. Social media is really increasingly becoming a walled garden. The internet is turning into a dark forest where people are comfortable sharing pictures of their children or last night's shenanigans in what they believe are more tightly controlled group settings. And so increasingly for investigators, insurance investigators, people who are trying to use social media as a data source to understand what's happening in a scene, it's so much harder. You need to look at Discord, Telegram, figure out what Discords and Telegrams exist in a community. Then within those public facing Telegrams and Discords, where can you find links to other Discords or Telegrams where you can see people are popping off and they're saying, this is the Los Angeles Reddit Discord. But for those of us who like racing, we're branching off into this other Discord and that one's private. And you want to join that one because the people who are into racing might have information on like you have to like try and chain yourself through as many private online communities as possible where some of this stuff might surface. And that is very hard to stay on top of with any tools that are available.
Yeah. It sounds like that would be one of the biggest challenges going forward.
Yeah, it's knowing how to follow leads from the public internet into the deep web, where you may be able to find more information.
Has the expectations or the skill sets of investigators also shifted?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a very slow emergence of awareness in this industry for standards for discovery, collection, and presentation of evidence, because the legal standards are ambiguous and the nature of the information is so tenuous that when I say the nature of the information is so tenuous, I mean what metadata is required, what file types should you keep of what you collect, that it takes a while for anything to catch on. For example, we are seeing more and more investigators ask us about our ability to capture websites in a WAC-Z format or a ARC format and be able to export that, because they are only starting to face questions around the legal defensibility of content, and they're looking for as comprehensive a capture as possible. We also start to hear more questions in the last couple of years than ever before around authentication of digital evidence. It takes so long for law to catch up to technology that it's really through recent precedent-setting cases you see over the last 6 or 7 years that people start to consider whether screenshots are enough at all, or whether they should be covering themselves by having digital authentication for every capture. So I would say that you start to see some burgeoning awareness in the last few years of why screenshots aren't enough and you need digitally authenticated captures. But in terms of staying up to date on like your ability to collect and discover information online, you can't rely on other people's tools because they have become too unreliable, which is really interesting. There's the textbook on OSINT investigations that gets updated every year by this former FBI director, Michael Bazzell, and he publishes this textbook every year, Open Source Intelligence Techniques. And previously, this was like mostly an index of tools that you could use and Google queries you could run when you wanted to follow up on a keyword, lists of databases that exist. In the last 2 years, in that textbook, he's actually stopped referencing any tools on the market and instead is trying to teach people to build their own tools and to really build their own Swiss Army knife for the types of investigations they want to run.
Interesting.
He's written some blog posts about this that I could share with you, but basically the argument is we're done trying to use other people's tools that rely on APIs, that rely on automations, and all because it's just not reliable enough when it gets down to it, and you need to know how to manage this for yourself. So I completely see where he's coming from, but I would argue that to say that, yeah, in the ideal world, every investigator is also a software engineer, and you can whip up what you need on the spot. But what you really need is some trusted relationships with people who can manage tools that you understand, and that the solution is not to move away from using third-party tools completely, but to develop a really solid set of questions that you want to run by anyone who is providing you with a tool or a third-party service. You need to be a connoisseur of what they may offer and know what you're asking for in advance so you don't get burned. If you need videos, you need to make sure that that's what they're offering, and you need to understand what their commitment is to keep that reliable. The education for OSINT people today is becoming increasingly technical, far beyond what I think is sustainable or scalable for the types of people who are usually in these roles, because their background is not in software engineering, and the likelihood that they make a mistake trying to manage their own virtual machines and running their own Python scripts that they use through tutorials. Maybe in a few years from now, we can get to a point where that's easier for people through AI tools, but we're not there yet.